In today's video, we're going to continue our 2019 NHL offseason plan series, and we're going to discuss the surging Carolina Hurricanes, and that's coming up next. Welcome back to Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. Now, if you're new to this series, we break this down into 3 segments. Segment 1, we're going to do a 2018-19 season recap, look at some key team statistics, as well as some key player statistics, and discuss any significant changes that the team went throughout the year. In segment 2, we're going to take a look at the overall salary cap situation that they have for this offseason, look at any pending UFAs or RFAs that they may need to deal with, and on the overall cap situation and how they can handle that. And thirdly, we're going to take a look at what changes this team needs to make and what are their most significant moves to be prepared and ready for next year to try to move the team in a forward direction. Now, also, if you're new to this series as well, I'm going to put a link up here in the YouTube playlist where you can take a look at any of the other teams we've already covered. We're probably about 2/3 of the way through the NHL right now. There's 20 plus other teams already covered, so take a look at those if you haven't caught them already. And if there's a team you're looking for that's not there yet, stay tuned, be patient. They will be there shortly as we attempt to wrap up this series here in the coming days. Now let's jump in and take a look at the 2018-19 season recap for the Carolina Hurricanes. Now obviously the Carolina Hurricanes were a little bit of a surprise. They certainly surged their way into the playoffs here. Record of 46, 29, and 7 for 99 points, 4th place in the Metropolitan Division, and got themselves into the playoffs here as a wild card team, taking down the defending Stanley Cup champions Washington Capitals in the first round with a Game 7 overtime winner from Brock Begin. It was an absolutely thrilling series for sure. They went on to round 2 where they swept the upbeat New York Islanders, who also had drastic improvements this past year as well. Round 2 to go on to round 3 where they faced the Boston Bruins and unfortunately found themselves being swept in round 3 here and out of the playoffs, but certainly nothing to be ashamed of. They had some tremendous progress this coming year. They made some tremendous progress this past year, and it's certainly fun to see the building full in Raleigh and this team moving in the right direction. Now let's take a look at some of the key team statistics, including special teams and goals for and against. Now, as you can see with the power play this past year, it was certainly had some work to be done. It's not terrible, but it certainly could be a lot better. It's 17.8% for 18-19 season. In the playoffs, they did struggle at times as well, so they could certainly work on that as well going into next year. The PK was pretty solid, though, 81.6% for 8th best in the NHL. Team defense was certainly a strong point for this club this year, so certainly PK, and as you'll see here, coming up goals against were certainly major strengths. From a goals for perspective, they scored 245 goals for 16th best, so pretty much right in the middle of the NHL. So pretty average that way, which is pretty good. Obviously a big improvement. Goals against, though, however, was really solid, 223 against for 6th best. So like I said, team defense, goaltending, they had a lot of strong suits in this year. Now let's take a look here at some of the key individual statistics, including their goaltending and top scorers. Now, coming into the year, obviously, it wasn't quite clear what the goaltending situation was going to look like. Obviously, Scott Darling was coming off a disappointing season. They signed Peter Mrazek as a free agent on basically a show-me type contract, and he put up some stellar numbers while Scott Darling ended up in the minors most of the year. They later picked up Curtis McElhinney throughout the year as well, and who proved to be a nice veteran addition to back up Mrazek, and played a fair bit at times as well and did quite a good job too. Mrazek had a record of 23, 14, and 3 with a .914 save percentage and a 2.39 goals against, so he certainly bounced back after some disappointing years over the past couple years before joining Carolina. Now, their top scorers were certainly led by a lot of their younger players. Upcoming RFA here, Sebastian Aho had a major breakthrough season, going to 83 points, whereas the line mate and buddy Teuvo Teravainen followed through with 76 points. So those two were certainly a dynamic duo for a big part of the year and certainly led the way offensively for the Canes. Veteran forward and captain Justin Williams came up with 53 points for a pretty solid season as well. Michael Ferland put up 40 points, got off to a really wicked start with Carolina. Of course, he came over from the Flames in that trade along with Dougie Hamilton that happened last year at the draft. Got off to a hot start, but then cooled off, had some injuries. And certainly could have done better. I think the way he started, many thought he would have more points than what he did, but 40 points is where he finished. Defenseman Dougie Hamilton put up 39 points. Of course, we saw a 20-goal performance from rookie Andrei Svechnikov, who was obtained in the NHL Draft last year at the 2nd overall pick. And of course, Nino Niederreiter proved to be quite an addition, putting up 30 points in 36 games after coming over in a trade from the Minnesota Wild. Now, normally, like I said, we cover all the significant changes throughout this season that happened to each NHL team, and really, the player we just talked about, Nino Niederreiter, was the main one and only significant change for this team throughout the year. They pulled off a trade with the Minnesota Wild, sending forward Victor Rask to Minnesota for Nino Niederreiter, and he took off with a tremendous output here of offense after joining the Hurricanes and playing a lot in their top six. Often playing a lot here with Aho and Teravainen. Nino had a terrific resurgence to his NHL career and certainly fit in quite nicely. So that trade right now is looking to be quite a steal for the Hurricanes. Now, of course, like I said, earlier in the year, they did pick up Curtis McElhinney on waivers as well, and he certainly proved to be a very valuable veteran presence back there, working with Mrazek. Those two held down the fort while Scott Darling was in the minors for the bulk of the season here. So ultimately, a lot of questions in goaltending coming into the year, but they were certainly answered by two guys that you wouldn't have expected it to necessarily be the case throughout the season. Now let's jump into segment 2, where we'll look at their salary cap situation, including any pending contracts that need to be renewed. The biggest contract the Canes have this offseason is certainly going to be pending RFA Sebastian Aho. He's certainly had quite a development to his young career and is going to be demanding a pretty significant salary here. So obviously getting that locked down is going to be very important. They also have RFA's Brock McGinn and Clark Bishop. I fully suspect them all to be retained and qualified for sure. From the UFA standpoint, could be a little bit different, but I do expect some of these players back. Captain and veteran forward Justin Williams. It's not completely clear right now if Williams will continue to play or not. He needs to decide that, and if he does, I would assume Carolina would be his first choice and that they would find a way to bring him back on a short-term contract. But I guess that's more in his court, more likely than the team's. But I guess we'll wait and see further word from Williams. But hopefully he returns. He had a terrific year for the Hurricanes and was a great leader for them. Of course, they also have Michael Ferland, who I would expect likely does depart. I think there's going to be a lot of interest in Ferland based on the physical play he brings along with some offense. So it wouldn't surprise me if he gets more money on the open market and likely departs. Of course, there's Greg McKegg as well, who came in and actually played a pretty decent role as a bottom six forward. He's a little bit of a later bloomer. He's in his mid-20s, but you know what? I can see them maybe trying to hang on to McKegg and certainly play a bottom six role for them. That would not be shocking as well. And both of their goaltenders, Peter Mrazek and Curtis McElhinney, who are on one-year deals, are UFAs as well. And I would expect either at least one or both to be retained. If it's only one, I think Mrazek will be the more important one just due to age. I'm sure they'd be interested in retaining McElhinney, but of course it's going to boil down to money here and what else is available for him on the market. But I do see a scenario where both these goaltenders return with the club, probably McElhinney on a shorter-term deal, and I would not be shocked to see Mrazek get a little bit longer. I'm not sure they're going to try to lock him up for 7 or 8 years, but I can certainly see them maybe offering, somewhere 3 to 5 range to get him under contract here to be their goalie, at least of the short-term future. Now, taking a look at the Hurricanes salary cap situation, they only have 14 contracts in place for next year, so there's lots of flexibility here. They only have $54.23 million in those contracts tied up, so that gives them 28.7 in space. Obviously, some of these contracts that they hope to renew will certainly eat away at some of that money, but it gives them a lot of flexibility to potentially add here to this team and make it even better for next year. Now, of course, one thing that's been a big help is this playoff run has generated a lot of extra revenue for this team, which is great. Obviously, playoff games bring in a lot of extra money for the franchise. And not only that, because of the renewed excitement in the team and the renewed success here, they actually have already sold a lot of new season tickets for next year, which also generates a lot of revenue too. So I do expect this team to likely spend a little bit more than we've seen in the recent past here and try to give themselves more of a boost moving into next season. Now let's jump over to segment 3 and discuss what this team needs to do to take it even further next year. Obviously, the Hurricanes had a major surge forward this year, get into the playoffs for the first time in a long time. And as we've seen in the past, when they typically make the playoffs, they go deep in the playoffs and made it all the way to the Eastern Conference Final, where they unfortunately lost against the Boston Bruins. But either way, like I said, they made some major steps forward here. New head coach Rod Brind'Amour did a terrific job. They had a lot of good development from their younger players, great leadership from Justin Williams, a little bit of unexpected solid goaltending from Mrazek and McElhinney. They were able to move on from Darling, burying him in the minors, which was a big help too. And this team really took a lot of steps in the right direction. Now, what else needs to be done? Of course, like I mentioned here, some of the contracts that they have pending are going to be huge for them. Getting RFA Sebastian Aho locked down long term is going to be a big role for this team. That's very important. He's by far their most important player, but they have a lot of young guys to really build around, like Aho and Teravainen, and Niederreiter's still pretty young. You got Svechnikov, you got some other prospects coming up. They do need to surround themselves with a little bit more of a veteran group in their forwards here, and they could certainly use another veteran top scorer, somewhere in that top 6, top 9 as well. I do think that times throughout the playoffs especially, they did lack some secondary scoring, and especially if they end up losing Ferland, who's not a big time scorer, but I believe he put up 17 goals this past year. They need to replace that and hopefully have somebody who can put up even more. This team has all kinds of salary cap space here. Now, obviously, like I said, Justin Williams was a key part of this team, a great leader, still very productive as well, was huge in the playoffs, so hopefully they can get him back on a short-term contract, but that's more up to him, like I said. Otherwise, this team needs to finally take the plunge here and trade a defenseman. They have too many guys on that blue line. Some of these guys are not getting enough playing time. They have more than enough right-shot defensemen, and more than enough young defensemen are looking for playing time. So I would see a guy like maybe a Justin Faulk or Brett Pesce, who's been mentioned for quite a long time now. One of those two guys likely does get traded. Even a guy like Hayden Fleury's been looking for playing time. You got Jake Bean down there as well. I can see one or more of these guys being moved this offseason and being used in a package to try to get the scoring forward that I was saying that they need to get into this lineup in the top 6 or top 9, to give them more secondary scoring, to really give them an extra threat in that forward group, to put up more offense and really move this team forward. It also appears as though GM Don Waddell will be remaining on with the club. He was only on this job as general manager for 1 year. I know this time last offseason it wasn't quite clear who Tom Dunn was going to be putting in that role. It ended up being Waddell, who was already in the organization as team president. And apparently he has said publicly that he will be remaining in that job, and him and Tom Dundon are just working at the fine details here of the contract. So overall, I think he's done a pretty decent job so far as general manager. So we'll see what other moves they make. But of course, I want to hear your thoughts, your opinions down in the comment section. If you're GM Don Waddell of the Hurricanes, what moves do you think are most important and most vital that they need to make this year to get ready for next year to see if they can take this storm surge a step further? If you're new to the channel, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, subscribe for more content just like this one. There's still a few more videos coming in this series to wrap things up as well, so stay tuned for those. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next time.